Okay, welcome everybody. If you weren't here when we announced it earlier, there's a sign-up sheet up front. Please be sure to put your name on there and let us know if you'd like to make public comment at the end. The food here is for everybody, so please feel free to help yourself. And we're going to get started here now that we've got a quorum as a community. Hey, how are you?
Well, that happened. But what I hope was to keep it to about 20 minutes and then commentary and hopefully advice and input. And the reason for that is that this is still a work in progress. We're working on this campaign with in 2 states, and we're working on a statewide level, and all of these things are a little bit new to a lot of us who are involved. So, there's been a lot of coordination efforts and trying to figure out what the best, smoothest way to move forward is. So we're still sort of working on getting a solid basis, a solid sort of base to go on, and I was hoping that this group in particular, because of the mission and the background that all of you bring, would possibly have some good input, advice. So the presentation I guess I would ask you to imagine one day that it will be this nice slick PowerPoint on the back end, and all the talking points will be finely honed, and it'll just work like clockwork. But we're not quite there yet. So this is kind of where we are in terms of figuring out how to consolidate some information from a couple of different sources and how to kind of put it together in a way that it makes sense and is most powerful and accomplishes the goals of our campaign. Which is, I should say that the campaign, which is we're calling the Oregon Homeless Bill of Rights campaign, is, although does end up resulting in some legislation, some statewide legislation, is really as much an education campaign as anything else, and because we really wanted to talk about what we see as the real root causes of homelessness, and get that information out there. So this kind of began. Not the specific campaign, but this effort to really refocus the dialogue and the conversation that goes on in national and local media and policy circles and stuff about our problem with housing, had its genesis in a report that the Western Regional Advocacy Project did, first in 2006, and then they've done 1 or 2 updates. The most recent being 2010. And then we'll probably do another update maybe next year. It was called Without Housing, and it actually documents the sort of systematic defunding of affordable housing and public housing in the country since that really started in the 70s, and that led to this kind of second wave of mass homelessness that we've seen in this country. The first wave being the Depression. So the report was really, really well received, but we're always looking for opportunities to get this information more out there, because I think it does begin to kind of reframe the conversation around why we see so many people living on the streets without housing. So these packets that I made are kind of what will be the beginnings of a PowerPoint, and some of them are drawn from an existing PowerPoint that we're going to kind of refocus and reshape to suit our needs today. But the report, I brought like about five copies. We're actually kind of running out of them. I think I've given one to Amy and Diallo, I think, before. But and the rest of you are welcome to take these if you'd like. We're running out, but you can also download. You can order them from RAP's website, or you can download them just in PDF format.
Jeff, I just asked them, we have what? storage for the office, if you don't mind.
So the report was really well received and kind of sets the framework for what we want to do. RAP, just so everybody knows, is a coalition of organizations in California and Oregon that are working on issues of homelessness and poverty. And one of the criteria for RAP membership is that you be a grassroots organization, which is not to say that there's anything wrong with public policy organizations or with PhDs in public policy or anything like that, but RAP tries to keep its focus on organizations that are actually talking to people who are unhoused every day. And Sisters of the Road was one of the founding members of RAP, and there are 3 member organizations in Oregon. They're all in Portland. Sisters, Street Roots, and Right to Survive, which is where I got my hat. And then in addition, there's a lot of, all the members that you see on page 2 here, the rest of them are all in California. And I think since this particular version was printed, there's been at least one more member, which is Hayward Community Action Network in Hayward, California. And RAP works with lots and lots of other organizations. I mean, they don't just focus on the West Coast. They work with national groups, and they talk to people on the East Coast even. A lot of that came out of this report and the attention that it got. So the report begins by setting a little bit of the historical context of homelessness in the United States, specifically by looking at what the government's response was during the Depression, which was the Housing Act of 1937, which committed the government to remedy the unsafe and unsanitary housing conditions and acute shortage of decent, safe, and sanitary dwellings for families of lower income. That was how the government responded then. And out of that, HUD was created and funded, and public housing developed. That began to change in the 1970s, and then particularly pick up speed with the election of Reagan in 1980 and the kind of ascent of the sort of neoliberal agenda. So that by 1998, the original Housing Act was replaced by the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act, which declared that the federal government cannot, through its direct action alone, provide housing of every American or even the majority of its citizens. So essentially, the federal government absolved itself of the responsibility of seeing to it that there was adequate housing for people in this country. And the result of that is the homelessness epidemic that we see today and have seen for the past years. And also through other policy decisions, the government essentially turned housing into a commodity instead of viewing housing as something that is a kind of a basic need for everybody. Housing is now treated more as an ability to turn a profit, and judged really on the basis of how well it does that. So another thing that the Quality Housing Act did was repeal the government's commitment to making a one-for-one replacement. So formerly, when public housing was lost or renovated or torn down, there was a commitment to replace it with an equivalent unit. That no longer exists, and the result is that since 1995, we've lost over 360,000 project-based Section 8 units, and housing is essentially even low-income affordable housing has been turned over to the private market to manage. So now, instead of there actually being public housing, instead of Section 8 being expanded or people being guaranteed housing, what you get are temporary tax credits for developers who will often get perks, like they can build, they can adjust the zoning regulations, whatever, if they agree to put in a certain number of affordable units, which are time limited. So eventually those affordable units go away, and it all becomes for profit. And the result of that, among other things, has been what we saw in the late 2000s with the housing bubble and the bursting of the housing bubble, and over 3 million foreclosures since 2008, and over 15 million vacant homes. I don't know if people have seen that cartoon that gets traded around on Facebook a lot, but it says how capitalism works, and it's got empty houses on one side, people who need houses on the other. And this is this is the direct result of policy decisions that have been made at the federal level, and it leaves communities with dealing with the results. If you look at the next page, that sort of puts a little bit of context into what the scale of the cuts that we've seen. From 1978 through 1983, that HUD's budget was cut by 77%, from $80 billion to just under $20 billion. And the reason this particular graph stops at 1983 is that 1983 is when we started to see the mass openings of emergency shelters all over cities across America. There were shelters prior to that, but nowhere near the scale of what has come since 1993. By the same token, although we don't talk about this too much in Portland, rural homelessness has increased dramatically, and as a direct outcome of Section 515 programs, which is the USDA funds rural affordable housing, getting a 98% cut between 1979 and 2011. So down from, what was it, about 35. Oh, this is actually in units. Down from over 35,000 units to fewer than, I can't even tell how few that is. I have to look up those numbers. But the graph plummets. At the same time, it is important to note that the U.S. does subsidize housing in the form of tax credits, and those subsidies have gone up over the corresponding period, while the money put into affordable housing has gone down. And there's actually one of the things I do want to do when we finish this presentation is substitute it. There's a different graph that goes back to, I think, about 1979, and it's quite dramatic how back then the amount of money that the government spent on mortgage income tax credits was down here. The amount of money that it spent on affordable housing, be it public housing or subsidies, was up here. Those graphs have it's gone like that, basically. So, and the thing about that is that that money, it's about 100. I think in 2011 it was about $104 billion. Over 75% of that subsidy goes to people who make over $100,000 a year. Because what the effect that has, and even the IMF talks about this, is raising housing prices, raising housing values, because people who can get a mortgage can afford to pay more because they get it back on their taxes. Therefore, housing goes up. Therefore, gentrification the pace of gentrification has increased, and it becomes harder and harder for people who can't get those mortgages to even get a basic, basic shelter, access to basic shelter. So the result of all of those policy decisions have been an uptick in the number of people who are unhoused, and that has been steadily increasing. I think, as everyone here probably knows, the most recent point in time count was just released in Multnomah County last month or 2 months ago. And despite all the efforts the city of Portland and the county have put into housing people, homelessness just keeps going up. We're now, I've forgotten how many years, 8 years I think, into the first 10-year plan to end homelessness, and we're a long way from that, obviously. And in fact, to the extent that has been now reset. And I don't think that this is something that Portland is doing wrong necessarily. I mean, Portland is one of about 344 cities that have 10-year plans to end homelessness, because that was mandated by Hope 4, which was one of the many programs that instead of actually funding HUD, instead of actually subsidizing housing, affordable housing, the government has systematically over the past 3 decades created all this sort of red tape and rigmarole and 10-year plans and different programs with different requirements and different funding streams that essentially try to mask the fact that where we used to spend over $80 billion a year on trying to make sure that there was an adequate housing supply for everybody in this country, we now spend less than $20 billion a year this is in constant dollars. So, I mean, that is kind of the core of the message of the report, is that we just aren't spending the money. And any other industrialized country in the West especially, certainly in Europe, spends a lot more of their per capita GDP on housing than we do, and they don't have the same problems with that. It's not to say that they don't have issues and there aren't people who are homeless, but they don't have it anywhere near on the scale that we have. The next chart just shows a little bit of the disparate impact that homelessness has on communities of color, which I don't think should be surprising to anybody, because communities of color are typically at the lower end of the economic spectrum, and so they get hit harder by everything every policy that the government creates that impacts lower income people has the effect of disparately impacting communities of color. So in particular, African American and Native American communities, the percentage of African Americans and Native Americans who are homeless is like 3.5 times the percentage of the general population of African Americans and Native Americans in the general population.
We know there are extreme undercounts in the Native community.
There are extreme undercounts everywhere, but yeah. No, that's true, yeah. So the last sheet is a pretty good summary, and I just included it mainly for reference because it hits a lot of points that, some of which I hit, but it started talking about the without housing fact sheet. And what we need to do, or what we as a group who are working on this want to do, is pull out some of the statistics on here that have the most impact. Because right now we're kind of using what we have. There's some other statistics here that would have even greater impact. And so that's one thing. If you get a chance to look through this and just read through this fact sheet, if there are things that particularly strike you as being really impactful and really relevant to what we're talking about, we would love to hear, we would love that kind of input. And then, so that was RAP's work up until about 2010, 2009, 2010 was, getting this report out, trying to publicize the report, trying to use it as a basis for arguing for, substantial policy changes at the federal level. And then taking that information and saying, okay, now we've created this problem, what are we going to do about it for the people who are actually most impacted by it? And one of the ways that, one of the things that became really clear was that instead of fixing the problem, instead of all these 10-year plans and whatnot that don't really fix the problem, what was happening is that cities around the country were starting to criminalize people for being unhoused, because there aren't sufficient resources. I mean, Portland is not going to end homelessness, and Seattle is not going to end homelessness, and San Francisco is not going to end homelessness. It's going to take a concerted effort by the federal government to sort of reclaim that policy goal. And in the absence of that, cities and municipalities around the country are left struggling with this problem. And so one of the ways that they're reacting to it is by trying to create exclusion zones and trying to create ordinances that try to move people along and try to use infrastructures like business improvement districts, which Portland has, one, to kind of draw boundaries around where people should feel like it's safe for them to go or comfortable for them to go. And RAP has decided, RAP as an organization and all of its members kind of got together to figure out, well, what can we do about this? How do we call attention not just to the causes of this homelessness, but the kind of response that cities are doing rather than actually fixing the problem, or rather than advocating getting the federal government to do something meaningful, like put more money where it needs to go. Instead, they're trying to deal with it by sweeping the people who are unhoused out of the way. So we started off by talking to people. I mean, like I said, RAP is a organization that consists of members who are grassroots and who are actually working with people who are unhoused. So we all collaborated on doing a survey. And the initial round of the survey, which was actually like a couple of years ago, was specifically focused on people who self-reported as having mental health issues, because that's a huge problem. I mean, as you probably know, our prison system is the biggest mental health provider in our country. RAP initially was trying to sort of call attention to how this impacts, how these laws impact not just communities of color, but also people with disabilities, and in particular people with mental health issues. But then we sort of came back and started doing more street outreach to everybody, to sort of get a picture of what people's experiences were with these kinds of laws. And Art, did you want to talk just briefly about the...
Just so you guys know, you've got about 13 minutes left on the agenda.
Oh, yeah. So I'm gonna wrap it up.
So for the street outreach, for the HBR, I was leading. And what it consisted of was a lot of work. It was about 19 different social services and organizations and beats that we were looking at. We had a group from PSU, some of the students there from the social work. that actually came out and helped us. And we did it for over 2.5 months, all right? We got 503 responses. You'll see in the packet that the survey's in there. And some of the interesting things that was coming from some of the students when they were doing this, and we finally had numbers because they were checking in with us, was, harassment for sleeping, receiving food, things of that sort. But also we have the numbers from California, and we were looking at those numbers as well. And we were looking at that, and they were showing the same thing, that this is some things that are happening between harassment, being cited, and arrested for some of these things. And I always like to tell everybody, you have to really understand, if somebody was arrested for receiving food, it could have been anything. They could have had a warrant from being on TriMed or a bad past drug offense or something. So I always like to let people know, when they see it, this is what they still see. They're still gonna put it down there because they received food, they went to jail. We never asked them what was the problem. But with this, it took a lot of people for that 2.5 months to get these 503. Right now, when you're back out on the streets, we say we try to do at least 1,000 by the time we get our 6 months. But what's happening is we need some help from folks to get across the state of Oregon to get some more numbers. We've been able to go to Roseburg, we've been able to go to Eugene, we've been able to go out and get some, but it's not enough. Because, we need some support from folks and say, hey, we know folks here, do you think they'd have the opportunity to help us as well? And so that's what we're looking at. I mean, when you look at some of these numbers, yeah, they're disturbing and stuff like that, and you're the Human Rights Commission. Where are you folks with us here on this and getting on the streets and talking to folks and saying, is this really happening? And that's what I'm asking from you folks. Look at this, look at our housing, and, let's go from there.
So the results of the surveys that we did, that we did and all RAP member organizations did, kind of fed into what we're gonna ask for in a bill that we are creating. And what I put in here, just so you have a little bit of a reference, is the first version of the bill that they introduced in California in the 2013 session, which actually got passed out of committee but then died in appropriations, in their appropriations. But this will give you an idea of what kinds of things we're asking people to be protected from, and mainly it is a civil rights bill. It's a human rights bill. It focuses on freedom from discrimination, because people who are unhoused are often profiled and just as people of color are and targeted for doing things that a lot of people do without thinking. I mean, I walk around, I'm sure you all see lots and lots of different people sitting on the ground in different spots. They're sitting on a wall that they're not supposed to sit on. Most of the time, if someone is not, if someone doesn't look like they might be homeless, nothing happens to them. But if someone does look like they might be homeless, there's often a different response from either private security or the police force. And that's the kind of thing that we want to bring attention to, and that's the kind of thing that we would like to seek some protection from. The right to access to public space, to move freely in public space, and most of all to engage in life-sustaining activities. We just had an incident at Sisters late last week where we had to call an ambulance for a customer who went into starting to go into a diabetic coma. He went into a diabetic shock because his insulin had been confiscated when the camp he was at had been swept, and all his property was confiscated 2 days prior to that. So this is having real impacts on people's health and their well-being, on their lives, on their. I mean, it's in some cases that's a pretty extreme case, but it can be life-threatening, and we need to start moving toward coming up with solutions that don't involve treating people badly. So that's kind of the nutshell of how we wanted to sweep from, go from the background in what causes homelessness to what the situation is now to what kinds of response we wanted to try to make. And like I said, it's not, we haven't like worked through all the kinks yet, and it's not entirely smooth, but I hope that kind of general drift comes through. And you know, there's thoughts, questions. I mean, we could talk more about the bill if you want, or just in general what you think about how we can better make those connections and how we can better kind of get that word out so that people, so that we do start to change the narrative around what's causing homelessness. That it's not, you know, it's not what you read in the Oregonian comments section, which I try not to read, but once in a while I do.
Does anybody have any questions for Michael? I mean, I'm sure we could go a long time, we've only got about 7 minutes. But I think maybe focusing on what the Human Rights Commission, what our role is in this kind of a situation, and what this organization would like to see as far as assistance in gaining access to communications with the city or otherwise. Maybe that's where we could focus a little bit, because I think there's a lot more dialogue that can take place. Anybody have any questions about that?
I think that is the question. Specifically, just like how I said, I mean, how best might a group like this help?
Well, one thing I left out a little bit. I mean, Ibrahim is here from Right to Survive, and Jason, who's sitting there with the camera, is filming. We have some of our own media that we're making. We just did a roundtable at Portland Community Media that's on cable access. And Ibrahim, Right to Survive, has a radio show that's monthly, right?
Yeah, the second Wednesday.
That focuses specifically on issues affecting the unhoused. And Jason is a member of a program we have that we run out of Sisters called Empowered Voices Media Project, where people are making their own films, and we work with Portland Community Media on that. So one way I think would be, you know, participating in that kind of stuff. If there's ideas that you can help us develop or you can contribute to, if for example, I think EVMP is going to do something about the year-long women's shelter next, and they're looking for more sort of subjects. And Right to Survive has done. I mean, they did a 3-part series just about the homeless Bill of Rights, but they've also done shows about healthcare and you know how people who are homeless do or don't access healthcare. Love in the homeless community. I mean, can't even think of all the topics. So you know that would be a way, I think, and maybe bringing in different communities and you know a particular focus on you know, like Donita was saying, Native communities, the undercount, or you know particular perspectives.
I think that it would take like much longer than 5 years to have that conversation, because I think we need like this kind of stuff. I know that the Housing Rights Task Force, which is a task force within HRC, is focusing on homelessness too. And so we are talking about it. You know, we need to get out to the community and talk to people who are the most affected by it. But it's, yeah, it's not going to be
No, I know it's not.
But obviously there's a lot with the sweeps and the enforcement that's happening right now. There are a lot of conversations that are happening at the city. From your perspective and the groups that you're associated with, are your voices being heard? Are you at the tables that are being set, or is that an area that maybe some assistance to you?
Not right now. There's a couple things that we put on the table and to a couple of the commissioners at City Hall and Mayor Hale. I have 7 emails to them or 9 emails for the last 7 months before he got there, and still nothing. We talked about the year-long shelter for women. We put it on the table, and it got passed over to the consultant. It was the same thing. He even talked to us that, well, he's really adamant about getting this going 2 months ago. Like, that's the thing, and we talked about, you need to ask some of us advocates that are out there, that sisters or Right to Dream 2 and Right to Survive and Bad Kids Inc., to be at that table talking to folks and saying, this is what they're looking for, but also not just us, having them at the table with some of the folks that are at City Hall or under some of the bridges, having them actually at the table and saying, this is what we need, this is what you want. We know money just came in, but it's always the same thing, administrative services. And I keep hating hearing that word because I know some agencies get extra money to help out. Why isn't that money being used for something that could be a pilot project for 6 months and see which direction it goes to? And this is coming from folks from City Hall on 6-point plans that Mike talked about today at City Hall. Little things that can be erected soon, you know, that can be erected within a month, and things are happening, and it moves folks away from that because then they can say, I have somewhere to go, I have somewhere to say.
And we've been working on with, you know, Right to Dream 2 has been working with Commissioner Fritz on this sort of relocation effort, and you know, I don't know how much I can or should say, but there is some interest at different levels of city administration in developing that model as a way to get people out of the doorways and into areas where they actually can achieve some stability. Obviously, it's a real challenge finding space for that. There's a tremendous amount of, you know, fear and NIMBYism to deal with in that. We're actually, I think, going to meet with the Pearl District Neighborhood Association shortly. We're actually this meeting a little early just because Right to Dream 2 is moving. So that, you know, helping out with that kind of thing. I mean, taking the focus away from these criminalization efforts and more onto, you know, what can we do that will solve that problem without citing people, giving them tickets, harassing them, confiscating their stuff.
So we're just about out of time on the agenda for this segment. One thing I would say is, as far as participating in the events that are taking place among the homeless advocacy groups, one thing that we're trying to do on the commission is to keep track of events that are taking place among human rights groups around the city of Portland. And so we have a contact email, and it would be great to be able to keep up with you guys so that we can maintain contact. And to the extent that we can do it, we're all, as you know, volunteers and trying to hit as many spots as we can, but to the extent that we're able to do it, have representatives at those events or a representative at those events so that we're continuing the conversation with you.
Yeah, and we do want to plan our own community forums as well as we're working with the HRC and with the housing on, I mean, we're coming to the thing on the 10th. So yeah, we want to keep working on that too. I mean, and I think that's probably going to be the big way that the HRC.
So, do we still have cards with the email address on it, or we all have? You got some? So maybe if we could get part of you guys, if you've got events that we should know about, that we should be participating in, please make sure to let us know about that. We can also, we're starting to work on an events calendar on the site, and it would be great to have those kind of things on our site so that people can go and see what's going on with you that way too.
Okay.
All right.
And
Thank you.
we'll continue to talk.
Thank you very
Thanks a
much.
lot.
Thanks so much.